Moved it. Hi, everybody. Miss Lynch here. This is let's see, we're on chapter 16. This is part 2 of our lecture. And here I am in a different classroom because I'm forever moving around the liberal arts building trying to hide in empty spaces to work. So we'll see if this is a regular background. I like having this dry erase board in the background here, so we'll see. Okay, I hope you guys are doing well. I have a meeting with IT today, and I don't want to promise anything, but I think that over the weekend we might have D2L up and going the way it should be functioning. And I think that next week we're actually going to get the ball rolling the way I was hoping to do back in week 1. But I think that it's going to finally start working out, you guys. So thank you for sticking with me thus far. And I'm sorry if this has caused you extra stress. I've been trying to figure it all out in a way that would not do that, and it kind of went the opposite direction. But like I said, I think that we're going to get back to where we need to be. So, all right, let's dive back into chapter 16. You know the spiel by this point. You should have all your stuff out in front of you. Okay. Last thing I said, let me just, okay. Really, the last thing I talked about was Remaking Native Life, this section in our book, and we looked at the Dawes Act and allotment and how indigenous land was just being, I mean, nothing new here, you know, but new ways that native land was being broken apart, all right, decimated. All right, and that kind of left us with the Oklahoma Land Run. Like I said, that's how, you know, this section of the country kind of comes about. And I think that the last thing I had you guys do was look at this map of Indian reservations. And I said we would pick up from there. All right. Going back to, I'm just going to hit on this real quick, but going back to the idea of the cowboy and the Wild West and really that kind of romanticized representation. A lot of this comes about during like the Wild West show boom of the late 1800s. So Buffalo Bill kind of starts that. And if we had gotten to finish the Ken Burns video, this is what it gets into, is the Wild West phenomenon that spread. And not just, you know, for people back in the eastern states, but around the world. So these Wild West shows are traveling around, and that shapes how people view the West. Okay. Yeah, and so what we've been talking about, Farming's been a big thing for us already. So we know that the real West included these farms and farm families. There were labor conflicts. We've been talking about railroad expansion, which I'm going to talk about some more. We're not done there. Yeah, and then there's federal government established in the West. So it's not lawless. These are territories that are run by the federal government, okay? And then also we know that these areas were diverse, all right? They had diverse communities, all right? It was not just kind of the stereotypical cowboy, all right? Okay, so that kind of leaves off where we were last time. So let us get into some politics. So like I said, federal government is present in the West, and this will kind of just lead us into politics in the Gilded Age as a whole, all right? So that is our next slide. Politics in a Gilded Age. All right, let me catch up with you. All right, so the term Gilded Age came from Mark Twain. I don't think I said this before, so if I'm repeating myself, I apologize. It came from Mark Twain, and basically it meant that anything that is gilded in gold, so just this outer layer of something, you know, who knows what material lies underneath. It goes into this vignette at the beginning of this chapter, and it's way more eloquent than I can put it, but that's where that terminology comes from. And it really just shows that things looked nice and pristine during this time, but there's a lot of stuff going on. So tip of the iceberg is up here. This is what we see. The rest of the iceberg is really this gigantic. That kind of tells you something similar about the Gilded Age, all right? There's just a lot going on, and it starts to kind of collapse, all right? Starting with politics. So like I said, we're not done talking about the railroad system, so keep that in mind, okay? Political corruption is kind of running rampant during this time, and many lawmakers actually held stock or, high up positions like directorships in, what do you know, the railroads, and also lumber companies, which are in charge of big plots of land and clearing that, working with the railroad. So it's just, they're working together, I will say. Okay, so corruption existed at the national level too, and President Grant actually had connections in the railroad business. So it's very widespread that people had their paws in the honeypot, okay? All right, political conflict in the states. This goes back to what we've been talking about. State governments during this time are trying to figure out, all sorts of different things. But we start seeing this shift in expanding responsibilities to include public health, welfare, and education, which we've talked about education before, okay? Okay. So let's see, cities became heavily invested in things like public works, so construction, water and gas services, things like that. In 1867, so going back a little bit for us, farmers began responding to these railroad policies, all right? And they organized what was called the Patrons of Husbandry. And this kind of is one of our first organized labor groups, okay? And then also, this is important, looking at state governments, some of them started to pass 8-hour workdays during this time. And really, this will kind of bring in this era of, this is the workers' movement, the progressive era. So we're going to start talking about workers' rights and workers speaking up for themselves, all right? So this passage of the 8-hour workday in some states, not everywhere, but this is first being kind of adopted, all right? Okay. So our next slide, freedom in the Gilded Age. All right. Yeah, so like I said, there is a revitalization in the labor movement. Our workers start striking, and there is kind of a growing degree of social unrest. Like I said, let's look at the term Gilded Age. There's all this stuff going on underneath, so people are starting to talk about it, all right? Okie dokie. So during this time, sorry, that was awkward. Social Darwinism becomes pretty popular. All right. This came about from Charles Darwin, who wrote On the Origin of the Species in 1859, and this brings up the theory of evolution. And during the Victorian era, people start equating that, taking the scientific perspective and looking at it socially, and how those same patterns can be seen in society, okay? So this will bring up what is known as survival of the fittest, and this entered the public discussion in regards to social problems, like I said, so this becomes a sociological conversation. And unfortunately, we'll hear more about this, but a lot of people, especially those people who are in power, like to believe that, survival of the fittest. If you can't make it, then who needs you, basically. That's still around today. That didn't really go anywhere, but anyway, so this comes about. All right, so that's social Darwinism. Our next slide is a picture of Charles Darwin, all right? Okay, so we still have a couple of notes on that. All right. Yeah, so like I said, this argued that evolution was as natural a process in human society as it was in nature. That's the whole thing, okay? Our people who are in power viewed the poor as being responsible for their own fate. Very anti-government assistance in just about every capacity. And they believed that someone's failure to advance in society was actually due to a lack of character. So like I said, it was their own fault. They put themselves in that position. Okay, so that's kind of what people were believing in regards to social Darwinism. Okay, labor and the Republic. All right, so 1877, there is a railroad strike that becomes known as the Great Railroad Strike. Okay. And this happens in multiple cities across the states. So Pittsburgh, Chicago, remember I said Chicago becomes a huge hub during this time, just for people migrating and industrialization, all of that. So it makes sense that there would be workers organizing there. And then also St. Louis. So as a result of that, the government started setting up armories in these cities just as a way to prevent any further potential uprisings. Okay, we have the Knights of Labor, again, early labor group. They come up with what is called the Conditions Essential of Liberty. They really were focused on trying to organize all workers as a way to improve social conditions. And this was the first group to organize skilled and unskilled labor. All right. Let's see. So they included men, women, African American workers, Caucasian workers, everyone pretty much except for Asian Americans on the West Coast. That goes back to what we had said before. There's a lot of anti-Asian sentiment, especially towards Chinese immigrants, because that is a large population moving to the West Coast. So there is a lot of animosity towards Chinese immigrants. So this is seen even in our labor groups, okay? Alrighty, their numbers reach 800,000 by, this is the Knights of Labor, not immigrants, sorry. So the Knights of Labor grows to 800,000 members by 1886. Right? And like I said, this marks a new era in labor organizing. So you can see the numbers of people reaching out and acknowledging some of these things that they're being forced to deal with every day whenever they go to their jobs. So new era in labor organizing. And this will just build over our next couple chapters. Okay. Protestants and moral reform. Moral reform kind of goes, it is moving at the same pace as kind of our labor organization during this time. And this was really a way for a lot of women to get involved in the social movement. Okay. We have things like the WCTU, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and they popped up, they had groups all over the country, all right? Yeah, so this was known as Moral Suasion, their campaign. They were really pushing for the outlawing of alcohol. I know that every time I say it, and even whenever I learned this as a student, I was like, well, why? That's lame. But it all comes down to women's safety. And really their push was towards individuals who were stuck in violent partnerships, okay? It's often fueled by alcohol. So, and a lot of these women who joined this group were raised in abusive homes or came out of abusive relationships. So it makes sense that they would have this perspective in trying to help women is what it comes down to, okay? So this is not just about alcohol. I have these other points listed right below. So things like sex work, gambling, birth control, and polygamy, they all spoke out against for other moral reasons. And there is the establishment of mission and relief groups in cities all across the country. And I think it must be chapter 17 that we will talk about that in a little more detail. So we'll see things like Hull House with Jane Addams, all of that. But so different missions and relief groups start coming about in cities by these people who are organizing our moral reformers, okay? They hoped to not only combat these social ills that we're talking of, but they wanted to help the urban poor and alleviate poverty. They wanted to combat child labor, which is something we'll talk about more. Child labor is a big issue during the Gilded Age, all right? And then they also wanted to encourage construction of better working class housing, which if you think back to my last lecture, whenever I was looking at the Jacob Riis photographs, this better working class housing, that's addressing those tight little apartments that we saw with no ventilation, okay? So stuff like that. That's what I'm talking about, okay? Okay. So, whoops, there. All right, let's look at the Haymarket Affair for just a couple minutes, and that's kind of where this chapter leaves off. So, we are in May, so May 1st, 1886. Over 350,000 workers in different cities end up demonstrating for the 8-hour workday. Mentioned that a little while ago. So now there's this push for all workers to have the right to an 8-hour workday. Okay? Chicago's the hub of this activity. Okay, so Haymarket Square is in Chicago. And this demonstration is going on, and 3 strikers, 3 of our protesters, are killed by police on May 3rd. All right? There's then a protest following day in Haymarket Square. All right? And actually, let me just, yes, okay. If you look at this next slide, here is a poster calling for workers to meet. Okay, so I can't remember if this is the one for the 1st or the 3rd, because this went on for a few days. Okay, so yeah, this was in response. So this would have been for, I think, May 2nd, actually. Anyway, okay, so our strikers are killed. This then, okay, let's go to our next slide. Also, actually, while we're looking at this poster, I just wanted to, the reason I put this in is really to highlight the fact that it is in English and German, to show how many German immigrants were in the cities kind of in the north and the northeast during this time. Anyway, okay, but let's look at our next slide. Okay, so our strikers are killed, and then a riot ensues after a bomb goes off and kills a police officer, several other protesters. So this leads to numerous arrests, and 4 people are hanged, 4 of our protesters, okay? So if you ever hear about May Day, that's what this is. This is considered a celebration of organized labor and what these workers went through. Okay, so that's what May Day is about. All right, and this is something that we'll get into more over our next couple of chapters, but as a result of the Haymarket Affair, employers took that opportunity to paint the labor movement as being dangerous and un-American. Remember, we got all these German workers, right? So it's painted as dangerous and un-American, a force that was prone to violence, and one that was controlled by foreign-born radicals, okay? So that's the way this is all then portrayed. Okay, so 8 men ended up being accused of the bomb that went off, and 7 of them were immigrants. So that was used by the people by our employers who we're talking about. They use that as ammunition, all right? So saying, hey, yeah, we have these 8 guys, and what do you know? 7 of the 8 were in fact immigrants, which just proves this point. Okay, so that they use that as justification to fuel this animosity they have towards workers and especially immigrant workers, okay? Okay, so like I said, this is just the beginning of the organization of our labor movement, and it will continue to grow. So we will talk about it more in chapter 17 and 18, and then 19 takes us to World War I. But so for now, we are getting into the progressive era, talking about workers, okay? Stay tuned. Please check your email. As soon as I find out anything about detail, I'm going to start posting stuff and getting everything out to you guys. if you have not received anything and everything. Okay, so stay tuned this weekend. I will start sending all the updates, and then we will get back on track next week with actual Zoom meetings, and I'll tell you the plan for all of that. Okay, I hope you guys have an awesome weekend. Talk to you later. Okay, bye.